It is the Nelson class. Hello, everyone. So, the Nelson class. They're cute. They're very cute. Honestly, there are lots of things I would like to do with them. Give them a bit more speed for starters. But why did they upset Admiral King, and why do they generally cause quite such a stir? Well, they look distinctive. That's something pretty cool. They look distinctive. And that's part of the reason for them. But the other issue for them is that when people find out quite how they've been designed, they realise these ships are the product of the largest, longest running, and probably most comprehensive battleship research and development program the world had in existence at the time. And that really is reflected in their design and construction. These ships are built. Now, why does this matter? Well, to an extent it goes back to the treaties, but it also goes back to the capital ships of World War One. It goes through all this history, and that is what I'll be talking to you about. Now, capital ships in World War One had been pretty darn important. And it's worthwhile remembering something. Whilst we have this image of these huge fleets fighting in line of combat, and this showing the great power of the battleship, at first thing after Jutland, it wasn't the case. And honestly, it wasn't the case, I would argue, until you get into the late 1930s, that battlecruiser somehow becomes a dirty word. And when I say becomes a dirty word, people start moving away from it. There are the Congos, which were always slightly on the heavy side from the battlecruiser perspective, slightly more armoured, slightly more heavy, and are move further down that line towards the fast battleships by World War II. There is a debate as to whether or not they stay battlecruisers. There's certainly still sources referring to them as battlecruisers. And as I said, they are built as battlecruisers, so they are originally battlecruisers, but they're on that spectrum. They are not fast battleships, but they're not quite in the battlecruiser spectrum still as well. They're sort of something special. Probably speaking, still battlecruisers, because that's what they were built as. But I know in the past, and I do way back on the Congos, as to how much they've pushed across that line. Because it also depends on which ship you're talking about, because some of them have more of a building work done than others. Mainly because they need to. And that does, depending on which one I've been reading about, I will go, yeah, they've drifted into fast battleship territory, or nah, they're just still the side of the line that is battlecruiser. But the thing is, the line between fast battleship and battlecruiser can, in certain cases, the Congos, be pretty darn porous. In other cases, it's what's it built as. What's its mission? That defines it. When it comes to capital ships in World War One, the legacy is not immediately, oh, we must build battleships and not build battlecruisers. In fact, if you consider it, after Jutland, what are the classes being built? Well, there is the Renowned. Okay, they're going to be finished off quite soon. There are the Courageouses. Okay, more famous as aircraft carriers, but they are built originally as large light cruisers, and aka Fisher's Follies or battle cruisers or whatever we want to call them. Oh, good lord. Then there is the Admirals. They are battle cruisers. Then there are G3s. They're battle cruisers. So, if Britain was so turned off the battlecruiser concept, if the Royal Navy had shown conclusively that battlecruiser concept at Jutland was terrible, that they are slowly making some very strange procurement decisions, including a lion's share of the first start of the design process that leads to Nelson and Rodney are battlecruisers. They are. And they're good ships for it. So why do we get this mixed picture? Why do we get capital ships Model 1 coming out, and if we're looking back at them now, you will see many sources which declare the battlecruiser was over, the battleship was in, da-da-da-da-da. Well, honestly, I would say there are two reasons for it. There is the longer-term enmity of certain nations' political systems to the concept of battlecruisers. Especially when if you really think about it, why is the Royal Navy building battlecruisers? Why are they building Hood and all those ships? Well, we'll get into that in a bit, but they're not exactly building them for fighting in the North Sea, are they? I don't really need them for that. There is also this other reason. In the 1920s, when asked to build 2 more capital ships, what did the British build? They built battleships. Not only that, they built battleships which quite explicitly exchange speed for armour. I.e., they dropped the speed down to have more armour. That creates a narrative that speed is not worth having at the expense of armour. That you need good quality armour before you need speed in a capital ship. And that narrative is what feeds into a lot of the thought processes that then define World War II, and a lot of thought processes that then define the world looking back. But if we look at the designers of the period, if we discuss them and think about them, they're nowhere near so one-stop shop, or rather, one solution fits all. The fact is, the battlecruiser, despite what happened at Jutland, had proved successful at the Falkland Islands, doing exactly what it's supposed to, had done well at Dogger Bank, despite the leadership, and had provided a very good capability for quite a lot of operations throughout World War One. And you're coming out of World War One, and you're starting to think, what is the next war going to be? Because, let's be honest, that is what they're going to be considering. And these are some of the sources I've used for this. National Archives, John Jordan's Warships after Washington and Warships after London, British Warships of the Second World War by John Roberts, British Battleships of World War II by Alan Raven and John Roberts, and Warship Projects, 1900-1950. They're pretty darn good. They are. Good sources. So, Hood and the Admirals. Well, they started this process. This process is, what will the next war be? Because, in the nicest way, you do not need Hood and her 3 sisters to fight in the North Sea. You really don't. Why not? Because what do the Germans have that's able to take on Renown and Repulse? More importantly, with the propensity the Germans have for broadcasting everything at maximum volume on their radios, in the what scenario is there likely to be where you will not be able to bring in an entire pack of battlecruisers, even if they do produce one of their vessels which are going to be vaunted and faster and more capable than all the other things they keep putting for them? And the odds of it actually being faster when you consider the quality of coal they're getting, yeah. This is the reality. Hood and the Admirals are not being built for World War One. Another thing that tells you that is the pace of construction. If they were being built urgently needed to face on German ships, there would be no one playing the games they are in terms of their production. There would be no one going, oh, well, shall we make this change, this change, this change, this change, this change, this change? No. When you need something to fight a war, you build it. You don't keep modifying it, you build it. In World War One, yes, Stanley Goodall was off helping out the Americans and doing some work with them. Another reason why they feel personally confronted by by Nelson and Rodney, but leave that to one side. But still, and I say this with complete clarity, but still, he is present and he is one of the personalities dealing with the construction going on of the Admirals. That is not a person who is going to be making changes in the middle of a war if you need the ship for the war. It just won't. So what is Hood and her sisters being a construction purpose? What are they being built for? Well, let's start doing some real politic. Okay? Germany is not getting out of this war with its navy. Whatever happens, Germany will not have that navy. After the war, that navy might be divided between the other powers, the victorious powers. It might disappear. The Royal Navy doesn't know at the point when it's ordering Hood and the Admirals. In this case, you might suddenly get people like Japan and America getting a boost in their production capability. Why? Well, there really isn't much technology the Germans have that the Americans and Japanese can't replicate, but the thing is, there are some capabilities they could see and decide they would be really interested in. And it would make their own systems that much more better. Looking at someone else's, being able to go through someone else's copybook in fine detail with their assistance will always have an impact, if used properly, especially on refining your own copybook. That's a problem. Next problem is, Japan is an ally, America is ally for this point, but Japan is expansionist, and America has, for the want of a better phrase, a theme in its politics which blames everything in the world on Britain. They are kind of like Russia and a few other powers in the world, in that there is a substrate in some part of their politics which blames everything on Britain. Now, the nice thing about American politics versus certain other nations is that this little substrate is kept quite a long way away from the surface, usually by more sensible heads. However, if you think the people in 1916 Britain have forgotten what was going on 50-odd years ago, when certain Secretaries of State were absolutely trying to goad a war with Britain as a way for uniting the United States, Britain doesn't have that short a memory at this point. It doesn't pay them to have that short a memory. So, there is still a level of trust not there. So why are you building the Admirals? Well, the same reason you start building the G3s and then the N3s. Because the Admirals going around the world are a great way of showing everyone how capable and powerful you are. So are the G3s. They are a great way of showing how powerful and capable you are. But it works on a multi-level. So let me give you a story. When I was young, I used to like reading Watership Down. It's a great book. It's about rabbits and their fight for survival. And at one point in the fight for survival, it involves two sets going to war. One set is very militaristic. They are very expansionist, aggressive, you could say. The other set is not. One set, the aggressive militaristic one, has it very much designed on the biggest is the best. So the biggest, most powerful rabbit will be the boss. The other set is more nuanced and subtle. But they are lucky in that they have one of the biggest rabbits you'll have ever seen, called Bigwig. So big he might have some hair in him. as their third in command, their head of security. He'd gone undercover in the other set to work out what was going on. And when the other set comes to attack, he's holding a key position, a key run. And absolute fear goes through that set. Because when he's asked why he's holding that run, he says, because my chief told him to. And my chief told me to. And that means, to the set that's attacking, the aggressive set, there must be an even bigger, nastier rabbit in there. Something truly horrific. Something that will make them into mincemeat. And that makes them very much afraid. And this is the point of the G3 and N3s. Because Britain was looking at going, we would rather not get into a mass production race again. We don't want to get into that. We doubt we're going to get into that with America. We doubt they're going to get into that with Japan. Not like Germany. Because that's really expensive. A tech race we can do. But we need to do a tech race where we set the terms. So here is the thing. You imagine a world where the admirals are going around the world. Or where the G3s are going around the world. Admirals were going around the world as an impression of the mighty battle fleet. These are our powerful battle cruisers, and these aren't even the most powerful ships in the fleet, you know. That's our battleships. Look at how big and mighty this is. Well, the G3s and N3s are exactly that as well. They are going around the world, the G3s are going around the world going, look how powerful, how big, how different we look. Are you sure you're building the right thing? Are you sure you've made the right decisions? Look how fast, how glorious we are. Oh, and by the way, we're not even the most powerful ships in our fleet. It doesn't matter at that point the paper. It doesn't matter the facts and figures and what you might argue to politicians is the reality of the circumstance. What matters is the image it will make. These are truly powerful ships representing others even more powerful ships. Are you sure ours rank in as equivalent? Are you sure we have a match? It's a little bit evil, but it works. It really does work. I would argue they could have done better. I would argue that they should have gone for better guns for Hood. The 15-inch 50s, which they were looking at for later options, would certainly have been a good example for Hoods, as would have been designing the Admirals around triple turrets. But life happens. And so you then have the Washington Treaty. Okay? And some people are allowed to finish off ships. And some people are allowed to do this and that. But the British ships, the ships the British are building are too big. They're way over the 35,000 ton limit. And they already have Hood in service. So this is where it comes from. The British are allowed to build 2 new capital ships, not exceeding 35,000 tons standard. And when those 2 ships come into service, then they can retire Thunderer, Ajax, and Centurion, with King George V becoming a gunnery testing ship. These ships are allowed to have a maximum gun of 16 inches. Now, there are going to be some sensible decisions made, and there are going to be some stupid decisions made during this, but okay. 35,000 tons. Now, I would personally have said that 525,000 tons divided by 35,000 tons, well, that's not really enough ships, is it? It's not. It's 15. That's not enough for Britain, that's not enough for America, and that's not going to be enough for Japan. But that's the scenario they agreed. And 35,000 tons when every ship that people are planning on building is in the 40,000 ton range. Let's be honest, the G3s. Well, if we go back, these are nearly 42,000 tons, or around that one. G3s, they are 46,500 tons. The N3s, 48,500 tons. And thank you to John Jordan for these lovely diagrams, by the way. So 35,000 tons is at best 7,000 tons underweight. At worst, 14,000 tons underweight. That's not good. And you're only allowed 15 of them. Not even 2 full battle squadrons, because a battle squadron is 8 ships. 8 to 9. But those are issues with the treaties. But they also mean that you have presented a problem for Britain, and this does start the British thinking off. Because if you're only able to build 15 ships, you're in trouble. And you have to present to the world the most solid battle line you can. And this is going to be a factor in development of thinking. Because if you're only getting 2, that's going to affect what you buy. Now, luckily at this point, the British could turn to people like Euston Tennyson Denicourt, one of the most experienced battleship designers of the era, Stanley Goodall, one of the other most experienced battleship designers of the era. Frankly, he'd gone off and helped the Americans during World War I. He's around doing all sorts of things, and if you want a good book, I'll be reviewing this at some point. The Diary of the Wartime Naval Constructors of Stanley Goodall. I'm a bit annoyed that it only does 1939, etc. onwards, and it's edited by Ian Buxton, who does a good job, but there are some points I've seen other papers from him which I would disagree with what he's saying, so I'd like to see the full context of them, especially when he's making points which are from earlier in the 1930s. But leaving that to one side, still still an interesting read if you like reading someone's diary. It really is reading someone's diary. Okay, it's a lot of notes which someone was making. At the end of the day, they were jotting down some ideas of what happened in their day. It's that sort of thing. William Berry, Director of Warship Production, 1917 to 1924. Director of Naval Construction, 1924 to 30. Kay, pretty darn experienced. And Edward Atwood, Constructor Superintendent. There's also a few other people going around. There's a very interesting American who's in charge of John Brown. Well, pretty much running their designing, and a few others like that who will be consulted during the process of design of these ships. These are all interesting personalities, and these are all very capable designers. So Britain's lucky. In the late Napoleonic Wars, they were lucky in that they had a very good crop of exceptional naval officers, where good was adequate, where very good was average, and where exceptional was expected. And it's the same with the designers they are lucky to have in the 1920s and 1940s. Yes, there are decisions made which are interesting. There are decisions made which have complicated consequences. But sometimes there is just no good decision to be made. We live in a world where there is a belief that you can make a decision and there will be a good and a bad option, and you can pick the good option. the reality of history is it's often a case of which is the least worst option. These are some of the earlier options considered. Now, please note, these vessels had the 15-inch 50. I am not making this up. I'm not talking random stuff to you. 15-inch 50. And please note, those guns could rise up to 40 degrees. Yes, the original Mark II 15-inch gun would have been a 15-inch 50. I.e., it would have been a barrel, a very long barrel, that was 750 inches long. That's pretty cool. Now, 750 inches long? That's, broadly speaking, and this is maths in my head, so please be kind. Roughly 62.5 feet. Now, the thing is about these designs, one gets you to 21.9.5 knots. It gives you 13 inches of armor and only 6 guns. So it basically makes you an all-forward version of Nelson and Renan and Repulse. Interesting, but probably not worth it. F3, 35,000 tons and 96,000 shaft horsepower. Gives you a speed of 28.5 knots. Oh, you've lost a lot of speed. But you now have 9 15-inch guns. Gives you one more barrel than Hood. F3 makes you a very, very scary customer. And the other advantage of these is that, well, if you're going for the 15-inch 50 route with 40 degrees of elevation on your turret, you can probably start upgrading your other capital ships. If you can boost all the Royal Navy's 15-inch gun ships to 40 degrees of elevation and 50 cal 15-inch guns, well, I'll let you do the maths on that, but that's a tremendous firepower boost. That would scare the bejesus out of pretty much everyone. Practically, that would have been a very sensible decision. Operationally, that would have been a tremendously sensible decision. Long term wise, we have every single ship in the fleet is 50 with 15-inch 50 guns, and someone comes along with the King George V and goes, I want to try 14-inch, they'll probably look at you and go, why? The one standard and commonality we have going on here is that everyone has 15-inch guns. And it would have been a fast fleet as well, because if 28.5 knots is the speed of your new ships, and remember that's 28.5 knots official speed, they'd be capable. The reality is, though, they go with a 16-inch 45. 16-inch 45. And honestly, you can tell why. There are sensible reasons to go for the 16-inch, mostly to do with the fact that everyone else has a 16-inch. Everyone else has that capability. Everyone else has the necessities of the 16-inch guns. And when I say everyone else, I mean the important people, which is America and Japan. Britain needs 16-inch guns in order to rank in and say we are equal. We have a big bad back home. And the reality is they are going to try and execute the plan they came up with, the deterrence plan, with the vessels they have available. Now they have Hood to go off and be the most powerful with a vessel wandering around of the Royal Navy in terms of viewing, while not being the most powerful vessel in the Royal Navy. If you turned around and said the most powerful vessels in the Royal Navy are now vessels with 9 15-inch guns, 15-inch guns versus 8 15-inch guns, well, these are a good addition to the Hood in going around the world, and certainly along with Nelson and Rodney would have provided the Royal Navy with 5 fast capital ships that would have been their presence force and would have spread a lot of the load of World War II. But what they wouldn't have done is really been the big bad at home that they could point to as the most powerful ship in the Royal Navy. They don't really look like that. They look more like the G3 side of the equation than the N3. And this is where the problem starts to come in for going for fast ships. Because fast ships are sensible. Fast, long-range ships like this are very sensible for a navy which is looking at global operations. This is a capability. These ships are a definite capability. But they're not the capability you really need. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you could get quad, I don't know, or 4 triple turrets, 4 12-inch 50s on the 35,000 tons, and the 29.5 knots, and still have the 13 inches of armour, and on the 35,000 tons, you would have been able to build the big bad and have it all. But you couldn't build that on 35,000 tons. These designs were worked on under Beatty's instructions, and Beatty is someone who, as you all know, I will only give credit to if he actually does deserve it. Otherwise, I would rather ignore his existence completely. But he actually does something sensible. He does push for these ships to be looked at. And I like Goodall's designs. I do. I'd also like to point out, this is another reason why I sit there and go, I'm never quite sure the G3s get completed as they are theoretically designed, because whilst theoretically they are this design, there is a lot of development going on this design. And then, of course, eventually, well, they make the decision. The 15-inch gun loses out because it isn't as big and they can't fit enough. 9 16-inch guns sounds unquestionably more powerful than 8 15-inch guns. It just does. And it can fit that big, powerful ship more. But the question again was, are more engines? And the Royal Navy's already looked through a huge number of options. I, for starters, really quite like this design. And before anyone asks why, it's quite simple. The guns are on the same level. I like the positioning of the belt. I realise this is definitely a battle cruiser. This is 1920-ish. It's J3. And it does show the difference between it and Hood there. More importantly, it has some serious firepower going on. If you'd built this rather than Hood, well then half the American ideas of what Hood would have been true, But also, there would probably be a fair number of other people very, very worried about exactly what you're planning to do to them. I.e., were you planning on leaving any of them alive after you were finished? But this is the chosen design. And as you can see, if we go back and look at this has a huge chunk of space for engines and boilers. This has rather less. Now, they have done something clever. If we go back to the G3, as the F3 design, etc., you will see there is a small problem going on here, and I wouldn't be surprised again if they had worked on this design if this would have changed around again. Because you have the boiler rooms next to the magazine spaces, or rather on the magazine spaces side. And you want to keep the boiler rooms, which are often hotter, a lot hotter. Furnaces are going to be massively hot, as far away from the magazines as possible because of the temperature differentials they're going to introduce. So this design achieves that by having the engine rooms forward of the boiler rooms and having longer shafts. Now, there are so many issues going on with these ships. For starters, 16-inch 45s instead of 16-inch 50s. Again, you've been looking at it, why not go with it? The difference in weight is going to be there, but frankly, these ships are built in under the displacement limit anyway, so you have space and you could have got you could have got stronger guns out of it, better guns. Also for me is the layout. Now again, the amount of times people turn around to me and go, but these people, and you've already said it, Alex, and you've given these lists, and you've shown the pictures of the two you can actually find decent pictures of, because finding a decent picture of William Berry, let alone Edward Atwood, is pretty much nigh on impossible, are the best expert architects in their era. Why are you going to critique the positioning of the guns and the batteries and the layout? Well, quite simple. Because when Arthur produced the most efficient ship they could for 35,000 tons, that's the layout they picked. And whilst I have no doubt they would change the innards around a bit, I don't think they'd be changing the gun layout around. Because that would require completely recalculation of the whole design, and it would change the entirety of the design. When told they had to get it in as far under 35,000 tons as they could, this is the design they picked. So this is another compromise. Now, it does give you 16-inch central turret, which can theoretically fire quite far round. However, the reality of firing that gun as far round as you might like to is you will knock out quite a large chunk of your bridge, your flag bridge, and your flying bridge because of the effect of the guns. So you won't actually have it back as far around operationally, unless it's really important, as you might. There's also the reality that if you have C turret as the raised one, you can bring forward your secondaries and spread them out a bit more. This is useful for providing better arcs of fire, but also providing more space for them. This was all known. This is a compromise. It's a good compromise. It's a good design. The canoes are great. 14 inches of armour. Well, that's going to make the point, isn't it? But it's 13 inch for quite a long chunk. So again, it's an evolution of this. Single funnel. Engines and boiler room arrangements. All forward gunnery. Displacement, 33,300 long tons. That's 33,800 tons is standard. 37,780 long tons, or 38,390 tons in full load. Length, 216.4 meters overall. Beam, 32.3 meters. Draft, 9.2 meters. 8 Admiralty free drum boilers supplied 2 geared steam turbine sets with 45,000 shaft horsepower for an official top speed of 23 knots and official range of 7,000 nautical miles at 16 knots. Why am I using official? Because I can tell you on a number of occasions we have multiple sources recording Nelson and Rodney going faster than 23 knots. How much faster? No more than a couple of knots, possibly, but fast enough that they scared the bejesus out of the Germans. And again, it's important to think of this as official top speed, because if we go back to look at this hull design, it's a cool hull design. If we then go look at these ships and go, well, they probably would have been a similar hull design. 29.5 knots, 28.5 knots. A lot more power. 96,000 in F3, so more than double the power. Yes, it displaces more, but maybe it could achieve faster speeds as well. 9 16-inch guns in 3 triple turrets. 12 6-inch guns in 6 twin turrets. 6 single 4.7-inch angle AA guns. 8 single 2-pounder 40mm 1.6-inch AA guns. 2 24.5-inch torpedo tubes. Armour waterline belt, 13 to 14 inches. Deck, 3.75 to 6.25 inches. Barbettes, 12 to 15 inches. Gun turrets, 9 to 16 inches. Conning tower, 6 to 14 inches. And bulkheads, 4 to 12 inches. It's definitely got the armour. But here about it is underwater protection. This is the point at which people start getting annoyed with the British. The internal bulge protection was similar to that provided in the G3 design, and consisted of an outer airspace and an inner buoyancy space and a protective bulkhead. The bulkhead was 1.5 inches thick, made from 2 3/4 inch thickness of D steel, and was 12 feet inboard of the ship's side. As designed, 2,870 tons of water were necessary to flood the buoyancy spaces, and this increased draft by 23 inches and reduced speed by approximately a third of a knot. The arrangements in the G3 design for blowing the water out of the buoyancy space by compressed air could not be provided because of displacement limitations, and a system of pumping and flooding was reverted to. Special attention, however, was paid to the detailed design of this feature, and the arrangements showed some improvements on earlier practice. Except for exercises and compartment testing, the buoyancy spaces were to be flooded in wartime only, which provided a saving in weight and therefore in fuel consumption in peacetime. The framing of the airspace was kept as light as possible, consistent with strength considerations, and arrangements were provided for the venting of explosions through circular venting plates, bolted to the outer hull at the top and bottom of the buoyancy space, and at the top of the airspace. During 1922, trials were held on the Chatham float, using models to test the underwater protection system described above. From these trials, it was deduced that Nelson and Rodney would be safe against a 750-pound charge, but to confirm this, it was decided to carry out a full-scale trial. A 1,000-pound charge was exploded against the structure representing the underwater protection. A very large hole was made in the outer bottom plating, but leakage in the hull proved to be negligible. It was concluded that the underwater protection was satisfactory, and that even a hit by a torpedo carrying a 1,000-pound warhead would be unlikely to prevent a ship so protected from continuing in action at a reasonable speed. Either as a result of these or later experiments, the venting plates were sealed off. During the time, because it was found they were ineffective during the time the maximum pressure was exerted. The 7-foot double bottom of the G3 design could not be provided, and in Nelson and Rodney, the depth was reduced to 5 feet. Earlier experiments had shown that this depth would provide sufficient protection from explosions under the ship. It's definitely a good idea, and definitely a capability. This is it. This is the vaunted underwater as protection. Instead of having a thick slab of armour down there to defeat a torpedo, you had air and you had water. And you had space. because air is cheap, especially in a treaty limiter which is based upon your standard displacement. Water is even cheaper. It's all around you. Your main effort is to try and keep it out the ship. Letting it get in the ship is quite viable for it, really. So there is underwater protection on the cheap. That is what they have. Now, their World War II performance, I like. Look, these are ships which are involved in pretty much every major campaign that the British get involved in, and a fair number that the British aren't really involved in, they get involved in anyway, and have an impact. You have the fact that Nelson and Rodney are key assets when it comes to scaring Bismarck and Tirpitz and German units. The whole point the Germans were building their force around was to be able to outrun these vessels. They were the big bad. If you were going in a scenario that you got caught by these things, there wasn't considered much chance of your survival. They were capable. At D-Day, they provided a huge amount of fire support. But it's not their most famous action. And it's not even really what Rodney should be famous for. In my mind, actually, just chasing down Gneisenau and almost catching her. But still, were they as good as they could have been? On a ship, as an individual ship basis, I do not see any problem with their construction versus the F-3s. Either one would have been equally or though differentially useful. The real difference becomes in that 15-inch 50 with 40 degrees of elevation. You have that as the standard gun on the new capital ships. You're going to use it as a standard gun. You're going to upgrade all the other 15-inch ships you can. Ours, I'm not sure about, but Queen's, definitely. Renown, Repulse, certainly. Hood, it'd be absurd not to. And that is a major force-wide qualitative boost. That is a major force-wide qualitative boost. It would probably have also reframed the debate about gun size. Whether it was caliber that mattered, or whether it was size of gun that mattered. It would be something that would be debated. It would also have been a big jump. You'd be talking about guns which have jumped 8 diameters. How'd I put that in old money? Let's see. Well, 8 times 15 by my count is 120 inches. So 10 feet. That's a big distance, and it's going to have a big impact on the guns firing, on their capabilities when they're firing. So why was Admiral King annoyed? Admiral King is the kind of admiral who is put in charge of a carrier, so goes to learn to fly. Admiral King is a thorough professional. Admiral King also likes to think he's pretty darn smart and wants to get the best for his navy. He has overseen the design of some very good ships and pushes for a lot of capabilities for the USN. I would argue he is one of those characters where you might not like him. You might find it hard to justify some of his actions and some of his definite personality quirks. But what you have to admit is he is good at getting things done, and he is fiercely loyal to the US Navy. Fiercely loyal to it, and fiercely out to achieve the best for it. He does it well, and he looks after them. And he wants the quality. And this is the problem again. I think he has a problem with treaties, but I think when he finds out the extent to which, because when the ships are sent over to America and are being repaired in American yards, and the Americans realise the British system that's going on, and realises that water, which is not counted as part of standard displacement, especially when it's feed water, is a key part of the armament of these ships, or rather the armament of these ships. It is a case of, oh, for goodness sake. Because whilst the Americans have been doing something not massively dissimilar, it's on a much smaller scale. It's a much smaller scale. And there's lots of other nations who would have been annoyed once they sort of found out. If you start to look at the way some of the nations are designing their ships, with cavity spaces, torpedo bulges pretty much built in, various levels of armour plate, all these things are part of this process. And part of the evolution that is going on. I would also say when you start to look at this sort of treaty battleship armour comparison scenario, you do look at the Bismarck and go, interesting. Very interesting. You can tell the King George V class has been designed by someone who's worried about having to replace the armour. He wants it nice and easy, dangling on the outside so he can pull it in. Everyone else is pretty much going, no, no, no. And then you have the North Carolinas also going, yeah, we've got our armour, easy to replace. Key part going on here. But in almost all cases, barring the Littorio class, the armour does taper off to some extent. The armour becomes thinner as you go down. And then it's substituted for by the torpedo defences. And those take up a lot of space. And again, this system is very efficient, which is sensible for the Royal Navy because they need to get the most out of these ships, because they are designing them to be the smallest viable warships you can possibly build. And that's a problem. Okay? You have got a limit of 35,000 tons. Yes, you do not want to do a Lexington. If the British Royal Navy turned around to everyone and gone, we have built these ships. They are exactly 35,000 tons. Everyone looking going, okay, be honest now, how much is it? It gets worse when you start thinking of, well, what happens if they turn around and go, we've built them to 38,000 tons. This is what they get on 35,000 tons. Imagine what you can do if you go to full cheat and use the 3,000 tons, like with the Lexingtons, on these. It would be definitely a 30-knot ship, and it would have 13 inches of armour the entire belt. And I wouldn't be surprised if not only were the engine rooms and boilers twisted around, but the engine room was divided up a bit more. I would prefer it to be a bit more divided up. A bit worried about it being quite so spacious. It's problematic for my soul. They did well in World War II. As mentioned, they did well, and they are a good ship. But you also have to remember, they are designed with three things in mind. One, the British are building a capital ship because they have to build a solid battle line, and if you've only got two vessels, you might as well strengthen your battleship line. Two, they are built to be the ship at home. And there's no one surprise they spend most of their life with the home fleet to intimidate the rest of the world. You see Hood, you see Repulse, they come sailing around with a flock of cruisers. They look all magnificent, all gleaming, all capable. And then at the dinner party, when you are exclaiming over this vessel with 8 15-inch guns and this very high top speed and this glorious lines, and they go, yeah, well, we're powerful, but we're only the second most powerful ship in the fleet. There's something more powerful than you? Yeah. Nelson and Rodney. They have 9 16-inch guns. Are they fast? Nope, but they're going to get you anyway. This is where they come in. This is why they pick capital ships route. They go to capital ship route. And this is why what they build matters. Now, personally, I think the 35,000 ton F3 would have been a very fine, sensible vessel. I think the 15-inch 50 would have been a very sensible gun. However, I can understand the status symbol. As for the armour, well, again, I think if they'd used the full 35,000 ton range, I wouldn't be surprised if you saw an undersea version far closer to the G3s than what was originally designed. It would have those pressurized air, it would have that sort of capability, because that would allow for a far more efficient operation of the systems. I've often said, though, the biggest change there would have been is if they could have built 3. Building 2 of anything is not enough. Building 3 gives you a true capability. And I think if they had been building 3, I think the argument for the slower ships would have been even more difficult to put forward. Because you could have turned around and gone, well, this gives us 16 capital ships, which means we have 6 fast ships. Hood, Nelson, Rodney, wouldn't be King George V or Prince of Wales, not Duke of York, probably Anson, Nelson, Rodney, and Anson. And if they'd been built to 35,000 tons, well, they would have been a very capable force that would have backed up Hood, Rodney, and Repulse, and Tiger, until Tiger went, which would have given the Royal Navy a force of 6 battle cruisers, which they could have done all sorts of mischief around the world. And they would have used for all sorts of mischief around the world. Realistically, the Royal Navy needed 2 squadrons of battle cruisers and 4 squadrons of battleships to maintain its 3 fleets. It needed 2 squadrons of battleships sitting in the Mediterranean, battleship and battlecruisers sitting in the Holmes fleet, and a battleship and battlecruisers sitting in the Indian Ocean. That's pretty much what Jellicoe was planning and talking about when he was talking about his Commonwealth Dominion fleet scenario. And that would have made a sensible addition to the Empire and certainly strengthened the scenarios that they were facing. But it wasn't to be. It just wasn't to be. And instead they're limited to 2 ships. And 2 ships, well, you need to make things work. You need something which is bigger and scarier and stays at home than goes away. And that is the Terrans. That is the Terrans. And that is what Nelson and Rodney were, ultimately. The Terrans. Right. Thank you very much for watching. I'm going to try and get this down to an hour dead. Mainly because I just want to see if I can do it. And then I want to walk a bit about before I have some food. And start live. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. And I'm going to add in a little question. So, go back to this design. I want you to think, if you go for the 15-inch 50, the F3 design, A, what changes do you make to the F3? And B, what do you think are the impacts for the wider battle fleet and the wider nations if Britain's going for this? What happens? Do you think they accept it? Do you think they get scared by it? Do these become, especially if they have 13, 14 inches of armour and 9, 15-inch 50s, etc., and even with the speed, do they become fast battleships? Or do they stay battlecruisers as that's what they're designed? I would argue that, but I would like to hear what you think about them. Thank you very much for watching. Take care. I'm going to expand this, and then I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you.